Hello, 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 friends. How are y'all doing? So good to see all of your digital non-existent faces in the chat. I have to acknowledge something straight up before I even get into anything, which is that the link I posted in the Discord server to our Patreon post linked to someone else's Patreon post, and it was an image of like a bunny, of like someone's like bunny persona. So I'm really sorry if you clicked on that link and were routed to a bunny persona instead of this going live link. So here we are. It's all been fixed. It's been edited. So good to see all of your non-existent faces in the chat. Scruff, Mitzi, Abigail, C, you're all here. Yay. Thanks for hanging out. It's going to be a good chill time. We're just going to be talking about some Andake lore. I don't think this live stream, this Q&A is going to take a super long time. So just feel free to chillax, drink some water, eat some crisps, watch this stream, have it on in the background while you're doing dishes, while you're eating dinner, whatever it is that you might be doing. Listen to the dulcet tones of my chaotic voice. And let's talk about Transplanar RPG's setting and Andake, and some lore thereof. So this is going to be pretty much completely guided by your questions. So if you're a patron and you show up live for this, congratulations, you guide the entire scope of how this stream's gonna go based on the questions you ask. I don't have anything prepped here, unlike Professor Chang's, which, if you don't know what that is, pledge to my Patreon to get live access to Professor Chang's Tabletop Workshop, which is my GM tip workshop. Speaking of which, though, this is actually probably a good chance for me to start plugging some stuff, so y'all know what's up in the Transplanar verse. So if you're a patron here, you know what this is, but if you're a member of the public who's watching this for the first time on our YouTube channel, hi, I'm Connie. My pronouns are they, he, and she. I am the GM and producer behind Transplanar RPG, which is a not transgender, people of color led, 100% homebrew, say it with me folks, D&D 5th edition live streamed actual play campaign set in an original, non-colonial, Orientalist world. We stream Saturdays at 3 p.m. U.S. Central Time on Twitch at Transplanar RPG. And if you're a fan of actual plays, but you're like, I can't sit through a live stream, that's too hard. That's too much hard work. I hear you. We also our podcasts on every Tuesday. So just search Transplanar RPG on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Podbean, wherever you might pod your casts, we're there. Give us a listen, rate and review us. That really does help with new listeners to find us. So with those announcements out of the way, we are, as of the recording of this live stream, we are moving into Arc 4 of our main campaign. Very exciting. Yay! Arc 4 Episode 1 comes out this Saturday. That is September 4th at 3 p.m. U.S. Central Time, and you will hear it here first, folks. If you're a patron, we will be doing a special giveaway on stream to everyone who tunes in and stays for the entire stream. You'll be entered in a giveaway. If you want to enter it, use the code in chat 3K, as in the lowercase K letter, giveaway, to celebrate breaking 3K followers on Twitter. Yay! Our amazing, beautiful prizes are sponsored by Roll20. Third place is pronoun token markers for use in any Roll20 game by, I believe, Dark Deer. Second place is going to be the Thirsty Sword Lesbians core digital pack bundle. This doesn't include the core rules, but it includes like various graphics, various tokens, various like scenes you can populate your Roll20 Thirsty Sword Lesbians game with, and the grand prize will be the Thirsty Sword Lesbians expanded core book bundle. This includes the core rules, this includes extra art, tokens, NPC stuff, really awesome guides for GM and player alike. So if that's interesting to you, tune in this Saturday. That is going to be September 4th at 3 p.m. U.S. Central Time on Twitch. Transplanar RPG. Use promo code 3K giveaway in chat to be entered for a chance to win one of 3 fabulous prizes. We're so excited. A big thank you, shout out to Roll20 for sponsoring those prizes for us. So with that out of the way, I hope I've stalled enough time for those who are tuning in live to ask some questions in the chat box. That's right. We're in this together, you and I, my co-conspirators. Ask your questions. We're going to start in just chronological order of when I see them on the chat. Let's start talking about Andake, which I have a map back here drawn by one of our wonderful mods and fans, Saga Illustrates. She's fantastic. Go search Saga Illustrates online and commission a map from her, because this map is just beautiful and it's of Andake. So our first question is from Mitzi. Mitzi asks, question, what was the thought process behind Andake not having a moon? or moons? This might already be asked before. Ha ha ha. So, Mitzi, that's a fantastic question. I feel like it's been asked, but I've never actually given a serious answer. Are you ready? Are you ready? Here's my actual serious answer. I don't have one. It was honestly kind of an arbitrary decision for Andake to not have a moon. I knew I wanted stars to be extremely important to the mythos. And I was thinking, if there are, obviously stars are going to be important, but what's another primary, big celestial body aside from the sun, right? It's the moon. So I was like, oh, maybe I should have also like a moon god, right? Like in my early iterations of Andake, I like basically sketched out like lore stuff for like a moon goddess that I thought was either gonna be Galtanger, who's the goddess of the suns, lover, or like a sister, or like a rival or something. But at the end of the day, I was like, 9 gods is too many. No moon god. So I got rid of a moon because I was lazy, is the short answer. The long answer is maybe there's a plot-related reason why there isn't a moon. Shall I be teasing this? Or is this just a red herring? Who knows? Have I decided? Well, you'll find out. And I think that's the extent to which I'm going to answer this moon question, because I feel like that's the only honest answer I can give right now at this stage. Moving on to the next question from C. Question: what is your favorite piece of understated world building in Andake? The first thing that came to mind was the language system. So as you know, if you have been watching Transplanar RPG, or if you're new to our setting, hi, welcome, this is Andake. The 8 primary nations that are currently in power here in Andake, each of them, they're not separated by race. So there's no like orc nation. There's no like dwarven stronghold. There's no like, ooh, the sexy elves live in the forest while the evil elves live in the Underdark. Like that, no, we don't play that shit like here in Transplanar. Which made me, because I was building this from the ground up, I was like, well, if differences aren't drawn along racial lines, if that doesn't exist here, if bioessentialism is just literally a fantasy here in Andake, how do people communicate? And, language, dictated by national borders, right? So like how in real life we've got Chinese, we've got English, right? In terms of languages, Japanese, Afrikaans, Swahili, etc. And it's not like only white English people speak English, right? Or like only Chinese people know how to speak Chinese, and that every ethnically Chinese person is born with a knowledge of how to speak Chinese. Like that's not how languages work in real life. How they work in real life is, based on the nation you grow up in, right? And like various like forces that like, come together to influence the primary language that's spoken in a place, right? So I wanted that to be more or less reflected in Andake. And I came up with like each language of the 8 major nations, in addition to Common, which is the language that everyone speaks. So it's sort of like the what's it called? The Babylonian tongue, I suppose. The Common, the Babel, the tongue of Babel, the common tongue that everyone speaks, right? So you can do trade, etc. I was very intentional and very careful with making each of the 8 nations like specific national language feel different from each other. And like I blended a bunch of like influences from like real life cultures in terms of like how I described how these languages sound. So for example, Tu, which is the language of the Kingdom of Tulong, which is where our PCs are going to next, in Arc 4, I describe in like the setting document that I give to all my players, including guest players, for like our interlude and for shoot your one shot, etc. Tu is described as extremely poetic, right? Like very like flowing, and like, people speak in metaphor here. And it's very common to quote unquote talk around a problem and not like directly address it, right? So like 2 people could be walking through like a rock garden, and like they could be talking about the stars, right? And how like several stars seem to shine brighter, than the rest at night. And really they're talking about how one of them is jealous of the other one's upbringing, right? But both of them know that's what they're talking about, and they both know enough about their culture and about their language to know that it's like sort of like taboo to just address it directly, right? So like that's how Tu works. Whereas Nabalish, which is the championship of Nabal, that's their national language. It's very direct. It's guttural. I was thinking like to inform Nabalish like German. I was thinking honestly German was like the main main real life language I was thinking of when designing it, but also a little bit of English too, like German, some English, like a little bit of like Cantonese as well, like a very like, in terms of the flow of the language too, like talking very much like this. And then you talk, sort of like almost like the flow is almost like Japanese, where it's like da 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 da. Da, 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 right? Whereas like other languages have like a different kind of flow to it. And I, to do research into describing each of the 8 nations languages, I just listened to a bunch of different languages. I like put my headphones on and I listen to like Spanish, like to Chinese, to Japanese, to Mongolian, right? And I was just like, okay, this is what it sounds like to me, who doesn't speak a lot of these languages. How would I describe it in a way that, first of all, doesn't feel fetishistic? Second of all, it doesn't feel like it's orientalizing that language. And third of all, feels like it's honoring that language in, from my perspective, right? Because to me, Japanese feels very like almost like bird speech, almost like very like da 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 da, like almost like it feels very poetic to me, So like Jukan, for instance, which is what the people from the tribes of Jukai speak, is modeled more or less off of like a blend of Swahili and Japanese. So I was like trying to put both of these two linguistic influences into my description of the language in the first place. That's a very long-winded way of saying I really like languages and how I wrote them. And though they don't always they're not always highlighted, I think, in play because we're all speaking English. And we're not actually speaking these like fantasy made up languages, right? We're not actually speaking Nabalish at the table, and I'm not expecting us to do so. But it's a piece of internal world dramaturgy that's there that I know I can draw upon if need be, and that helps inform how I GM things. It's just there in the background, and it's important to me. So let's move on to the next question, because that was a great one. I could go on and on about things, understated pieces of world building that I had a lot of fun with, but let's move on from that question. Little bit of stuttering, but not super bad. Good to know. I am uploading our latest interlude episode, which is 4.5 hours long. And I've been uploading it all day, and it's only at 50%. So that's probably where some of the stuttering is coming from, because our upstream's a little wonky, because like I'm live streaming and I'm uploading, so that's probably what it is. But moving on, let's see. Question from C. Why 8 gods? Because 8 is a lucky number in Chinese. That's it. Yeah. I feel like 8 is a very, what's it called? Not perspicacious? That's the wrong one. Prosperous? I don't know. 8 is just a good number in my culture, and I like it. And also, if you flip it on its side, it's an infinity sign. That's also a big reason, honestly. In a more, I think, satisfying way to answer that, one god, I was like, that's Christianity. I don't want this to be a monotheistic religion, right? I'm not interested in that. 2 gods, I'm like, that's too few. Because then that's literally too black and white. Because then you have like a god of this and a god of that, right? 3 gods, I'm like, again, that's a little too much like Christianity to me because the Holy Trinity, right? I wanted to move away from that. 4 gods, I was like, that could be interesting. 4 elements, 4 cardinal directions. I was thinking of things that come in like ones and pairs and trios and quadruples, right? And I was like, 4 is also a little like too few. I didn't, because like the only 4 things that gods could be I could think of were like either elements or directions, and I didn't want to go in that direction. And I was also like, 4 is even, which means that the gods could be like evenly matched. And I wanted, I was like, oh, and if it's 4 of them, that's like too few. So I was like, let's bump up to 5. I was seriously deciding between 5 gods and 8 gods. Why 5? Because those are the 5 colors in Magic the Gathering. And I feel like it's a very easy way to base a pantheon around. You've got white, black, red, green, and blue. And I was seriously tempted to just base the Andaken gods around these colors and around these concepts, but I was like, I don't want the foundation of my religious world building to be based off of Magic the Gathering, which is why I was like, okay, let's look at 6. I just didn't like 6. I was like, 6 is a weird number. There aren't really any, what comes in 6s? A 6-pack of beer? No, thank you. Moved up to 7. 7 is like the lucky number 7, right? A very fortuitous number. I was seriously also thinking about 7, but I was like, that's That's isn't that Skyrim the 7? And also now Dimension 20's come out. This is before Dimension 20 like came out with the 7. But I was like, I feel like the 7's either in like I think it's like the 9 in Sky, like, and also like the Mighty 9, right? Which is why I didn't want to do 9. Also the 7 I feel like is either Game of Thrones or Skyrim. So I was like, I feel like other places have already used a Pantheon of 7, which brought me to 8. And I was like, 8 is not 9, which is too much like Mighty 9. It's not 7, which is too much like the 7 for like Game of Thrones or Skyrim or whatever. 8 is, 8 feels unloved. And also 8 is like, a lucky number. So that's how I landed on 8. To be quite honest. Also, from a more practical standpoint, I was like, I feel like I can design 8 gods. 6 is a weird number. I could probably do between 7 to 9 gods and have them all feel distinct, right? But also encompass enough things in the world that there are divine domains around, right? Which is how I landed on 8. Let's see. Abby says no moon means the stars aren't blocked out by a full moon. So that's true. That's true. That's why the stars are so dazzling in the night sky. Envy says maybe someone's GF becomes the moon. Sorry, I'm so sorry I read your comment out like that. Maybe someone's GF becomes the moon. I'm glad clipping doesn't exist on YouTube Live because I would not want people to clip that. Moving on. Abby says implying the evil elves aren't sexy. Listen, all the elves, if Andake were drawn along racial lines, all the elves would be sexy. It's just that there would be like one faction that were particularly sexy and known for their sexiness, right? While like another faction would be known for being like kind of evil. Just kidding. I actually hate that kind of world building, so moving on from that. Mitzi asks, how did you decide the locations placements in the geography of Andake? That is a fantastic question. I knew basically when I was sketching the map on my own, longhand, in my notebook, that I wanted the 8 nations to be more or less the same size. I thought to myself, I was like, it could be really interesting if one nation were like significantly smaller or significantly bigger than the other 7, or if there were like 3 nations that were super big and like the other like 4 were like really small. I was like thinking about like, how do I want to like proportion landmass, right? Because like landmass also would probably speak toward the relative power that like one nation has. And I also toyed around with the idea of like an empire that was like small, but they had conquered like other nations. But in the end, I was like, I don't really want to like talk about like imperialism super hard, like in this campaign. Like because that feels a little too close to colonization to me, and those aren't themes that I was interested in exploring. Nor were they themes my players were interested in exploring at the time. So deciding the locations placements, after I decided I wanted them to all relatively be like the same size-ish, I drew up, like, I just sort of like, drafted a map that really had no rhyme or reason behind it. And I thought to myself, okay, let's look at the climate here, right? Like, what kind of climate exists where? And at the time, I was doing something known as art shanty projects. If you're in Minneapolis or the Twin Cities region and you know what that is, holla. If you don't know what that is, art shanty projects is a yearly winter arts festival done on the ice, frozen lake, somewhere in Minnesota. For the past couple of years, it's been on B'day Unma, also known as Lake Harriet, here in Minneapolis. And it's awesome. There's like these like cute little colorful shanties that are all over the ice that are basically like outdoor sculptures, interactive like art, right? Like they had like a camera obscura on ice the year that I was working this as production staff. They had like these little skis that they could like, kids and like people who had difficulty moving around on ice could like be carted around on. It was really awesome. And I was thinking, I knew I wanted there to be a nation that was on the ice because I was really inspired by my time as production staff at art shanty projects. So I was like, boom, okay, there has to be like a winter nation, right? Like, and that's how the Commune of Morose was born. And this idea of like communal living also felt like very accurate to a lot of the drives behind the art shanty projects, because they were all like very much like love thy neighbor, like let's just make art together. So I wanted like something to reflect that on ice. I also knew I wanted there to be like a desert area, but I didn't want there to be like a desert nation, if that makes sense. Because I'm like, then that's just, that it's too easily falls into the tropes of like a fantasy Middle East. You know what I mean? And I'm like, I don't want there to be an equivalent to that, like in Andake, which is why if you look at the map, I wonder if I can show without, because I'm not, am I wearing pants? Question mark. That's going to be a mystery. The northern part of the mainland in Andake is split in half by the Euclid Chasm, but on either side, on the western side, is the Badlands, which I drew like buttes and mesas. I'm thinking like, you know, the Badlands of North America. I'm thinking of like, you know, the national parks in like Arizona, etc. I was really, you know, the Grand Canyon, I was really inspired by. Basically, I started with like ideas for ecologies and climates I wanted there to be, and like building the nations around those, because I knew I wanted Andake to be super diverse. I was like, I want there to be jungles, I want there to be mountains and swamps, and deserts and fresh rivers and forests, all kinds of forests. I want there to be volcanoes. I want there to be like icy mountains. I want there to be a mountain range. Like I had like this wish list of things I wanted the world to contain, and I just sort of like built the nations around those areas. But I was also very careful not to make like, not for like the nations to not be defined by one single climate, right? So let's look, you know, like Long isn't like the bamboo nation, right? Long, I very specifically wrote in like, it has a lot of like bamboo groves in it and like forests, but it also has like tons of grasslands and hills, and like it's south of the God Spine, so like the mountain ranges to the north of it, right? And it's got like this like massive like a dock economy and like port, you know, like the southern tip of Long is like this super bustling port, because this like Uhanaki is just like a, you know, couple weeks journey to the south, right over the sea. That was important to me as well. So, like, I hope that answered your question. Like, I was just like, I need to have all these cool, like, ecological features in Transplanar. And, like, over the course of our first main campaign, I wanted the PCs to be able to experience a bunch of different climates. Like, that was important to me, too. Like, they weren't always just, like, going over grasslands, or they weren't always just going through a forest, right? Like, we've been through the Badlands, which was a lot of fun. We were in Dabathati, which is built into a mountain. We were in the Court of Ravens, which is this, like, swamp, this, like, kind of cold swamp. And then, like, the Championship of Nabal, which was in a forest, you know, the carnival, and, like, an urban setting with, like, you know, with Rasso. So like all of these things came into factor when like designing where to put each nation. And I also wanted to resist stereotypes tied to fantasy cultures, right? So again, like I wanted to avoid like the desert nation, you know, that's really just like the amalgamation of everyone in the quote unquote Middle East, which is really like Western Asia, right? And I wanted to avoid the like, ooh, the jungle nation with like really messed up like anti-indigenous and like anti-black imagery there. I like wanted to just like get away from like those images and those visual references and touchstones as well. So moving on to the next question, also for Mitzi. What influences and stuff did you use and incorporate in the creatures/monsters? Fantastic question. So I don't, you know what? Who cares? I'm just going to say it. So the chicken boys in Arc 1, Episode 1 that I describe as these like bipedal, fleshy, like they look like featherless chickens, except their eyes are like flat and like glazed, like shark eyes. They don't have any arms. It's just like these like muscular two legs, like these long talons and these like a mouthful of gnashing teeth. Yeah, that's a canon 5e monster. That's called the Wretched. And it's part of the Sorrow Sworn, which are basically monsters from the, I think from the Shadowfell that like feed on negative emotions, right? So you can just literally Google right now, Sorrow Sworn, the Wretched, and boom, you'll be like, oh my god, that's a chicken boy. That's what Connie was using. But I was very specific in like not calling it, I'm using the Wretched. Right? I was specific in not saying that, and, you know, and just describing these monsters that I'd like flip through the monster manual, or like I'd flip through like Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes or whatever, or Xanathar's Guide to Everything. I'd like flip through these like source books. I'd like be like, that's a cool monster. I'm not going to call it that. How would I describe it? Instead of like using how the description is written. And I would like just look at this picture and I'd write a description of it, just like from my own words. And like, that's how I would like quote unquote like homebrew a monster, right? And I'd like basically just I basically never use their actual stats. I'm pretty sure, It's been like over a year since like Arc 1 Episode 1, so I might have used the Wretched's actual stat block, but I also might have like homebrewed it a little, like fit my needs a little bit more. But my influences for a lot of the empty monsters, which are the monsters that are spawning after the Cataclysm, were with a lot of like D&D, I would say like classic demons, like the chain monster is because y'all are my patrons that are tuning in, I'll let you know. The chain monster, the Puss Boy, is a Sibriex, right? Which is actually like a CR 17 monster that I threw at a bunch of like my level 3 PCs at the time, but I like homebrewed and like reflavored and like messed with the stat block to make it appropriate for like a level 3 encounter, and also like make it more fun than just like, oh, it's gonna bite you, oh, it's gonna squirt pus at you. I was like, it's gonna warp your flesh, you know, and like that's gonna be triggered like a lot more often than what it says in the actual Sibriex stat block. So there's a lot of that. I'm a big fan of not making more work for myself than necessary, so that's why I look at like a lot of monsters that other people have already made in like D&D source books, and I just sort of reflavor them, or I mess with the mechanics a little bit more, or I mash them together. I like put multiple monsters together, right? Or like I'll use a step block for one, but the appearance for another, right? To sort of like inform my monster building. The Face Stealer, though, I think it made its lovely debut in Arc 1 Episode 9, and I only know this because C and I have been editing Arc 1 back and forth this past month together. The Face Stealer was entirely my creation. I was like, I just need something real fucked up. What about a thing that steals your face? It can slice your face off, your face will appear on its body, it'll regain HP, and it's gonna take your face. And I was like, why not? So that was a monstrosity of my own creation. In terms of other influences, non-like deadly monsters, the Kui, for instance. Kui are a actual real like Chinese mythological beast. These like one-legged, I think in the mythology they're hornless, like hopping turquoise cows, like oxen, right, that live in the mountains, and they're like a mountain a shan jing is like a creature, like a mystical ghouly creature or something. And I found like a list of a bunch of like Chinese monsters that were like real weird. And I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna use some of these like in Transplanar, because I've never seen these monsters used like ever before in any D&D campaign or any piece of media I've ever consumed, right? And I am proud to say, if you have Shang-Chi, I don't actually know how to pronounce it. Is it Shang-Chi? I don't know. But Shang-Chi, I guess, is like the English way of saying it. The Legend of the Ten Rings is coming out, Marvel, and it's been leaked / it's been confirmed. So plug your ears if you don't want like minor spoilers about like a character that comes up in Shang-Chi. That I think it's got a D. Let me look it up actually right now, because there's no way I shouldn't. Di Jiang. I don't know what the actual characters are, so I don't know what the pronunciation is. The tones are for this. But a Di Jiang is also like a Chinese mythological animal. If you're listening, could you please bring in the plush? If you're listening to this, could you please bring in the plush so I can show it to everyone? But I debuted this in our Gen Con TV one-shot that we used Quest RPG with like a couple months back at this point. This monster that doesn't have a face, but it's got like six limbs, and it's got these 2 little wings that come out of its back. It just flies around. And I was like, that shit's adorable. I need to put it into the Transplanar-verse somehow. So like a lot of my influences are also like Chinese mythological animals and creatures, which is important to me. And the Dragonborn here he is. Oh my god. Oh no, I dropped it. 1 second. I'll go to the BRB screen because I may or may not be wearing pants. 1 second. Here I am, I'm back. Here he is. Look at her. Wow, look at how rotund she is. She is a potato. She has no face. She has no face. And look at this. Look at these wings. I imagine that she flies by just flapping the wings really quickly, like a bumblebee, and she could just sort of like bzzz, like I love her. I love her. Her name's Dee Dee. Their name is Dee Dee. So we've gone kind of far away from the original question, which is influences stuff to use and incorporate in creatures and monsters. I hope that was useful. So in summary, D&D monsters that already exist, but I reflavor them. Chinese mythological creatures, and I'm excited to start including creatures and monsters from other cultures as well, but I am gonna be really careful about doing that respectfully, because I know there's been like some fuck shit with like specifically using like entities from like indigenous cultures that like are not very respectful or accurate to how the, you know, entity is portrayed in those actual cultures. So it's important to me to like do my due diligence and my research, which is why I'm like starting with Chinese creatures, because I feel like I actually have the latitude and like the depth of understanding to kind of do that on my own without feeling like I'm like orientalizing myself or like my own culture, if that makes sense. So moving on. Next question from C. Who is Voska? Voska is one of the other members of Equilibrium, which is basically the group, the organization that the PCs are a part of, that Dr. Lusso is in charge of, the Equilibrium and Guidance Group, or EGG for short. Voska is another member. You have not met her yet. This is what I can say about her. She is a monk. She knows a lot about tea and how to unblock it. And she is from Morose. These are the things I can tell you about Voska right off the bat. And she was romantically involved with Atalanta, everyone's favorite champion from Nepal, who is now RIP. Moving on. Moving on to the next question. Let's see. Also from C. What drew you to a story/world that's so relational to Divinity? Oh, so I do not have religious... Well... Uh-oh, sisters. I was gonna say I don't have religious trauma, but, like, I instantly thought of, like, all of, like, the religious homophobia I was brought up with. So maybe I do. Uh-oh, sisters. Do I? Who knows? Not gonna think about that right now. But that is probably a subconscious lure for me. Building a world where divinity and the gods are so present. Specifically, Transplanar RPG's main campaign, campaign number 1. It's all about like quelling the various god shards, right? That's basically what my PCs are doing. And like trying to bring balance to Andake by restoring the stars and by conjunction the gods to this realm. So like, I mean, I'm very much of the mind of like letting the pen guide you when you draw. So I guess like that's sort of that's what's happening. I'm letting the pen guide me. It just sort of came out to be this way. Also, why make a fantasy world if you're not gonna have some dope, sexy gods in it, huh? And like in a more like I think like a mechanical or practical way to answer that question, in a lot of the rules of D&D 5th edition, like so much of it is about other planes and about like magic, right? And like magic coming from the gods, right? So like that's another reason why gods are prominent in Andake. Also, I just think it's like dope, right? Like something that makes me excited when designing a fantasy world is thinking about gods, right? And like what gods mean. In my world, right? Our gods are obviously symbols of power of some sort. Like what kind of power, right? Like gods aren't just like entities, but they are indicative of what's important to people and what they worship, right? So if you worship a god of war, what does that say about you? And how are you worshiping this god of war? And what does war mean to you? Because Yudabathi in Andake is our god of war, the 3-headed god of mountains and war. And Yudabathi, I very intentionally wrote as having 3 heads, 3 different faces, 3 different ways of relating to war. And war not just as in like armies, you know, coming into conflict with each other, but just conflict in general, right? So like the 3 different heads, you know, the aspect of war that's destruction, that's pretty straightforward. The aspect of war that's creation, right? Like, and the aspect of war that's protection. So like not just fighting for fighting's sake or fighting to just destroy, but fighting to protect the things that are important to you. Fighting, you know, burning down a forest so you can have, you know, the silt that's necessary to grow new life from, right? That's, you know, the creation aspect of war. So like really being, you know, because when you write about gods in a fantasy world, what you're really writing about is what's important in your world, right? And like, what are the lessons here in your world? And what are the themes of your world, right? Because if you're writing a world where the gods are dying, or dying out, or extinct, or they're all like super corrupt and horrible, then that tells me where you're, you know, that tells me a little bit about like your priorities as a GM and about your own relationship to power as a GM and like the things you're interested in exploring, right? Because here in Andake, the gods have no inherent alignments, which was also really important to me. It's just all based on how you worship them, right? And like how you interpret their will. Because you could interpret Mahu, who's the a goddess of storms, of this Mahu of the Southern Tempest, goddess of oh my god. Bonus points if you can name Mahu's domain sooner than me. Volcanoes and ships. Volcanoes and water and fire, basically. Mahu of the Southern Tempest. Storms, volcanoes and storms. So you can worship her like destructive aspect, right? You'd be like a storm sorcerer who like worships Mahu and is like, yes, Mahu's all about power. It's all about like enacting fire and wind and wave on this world. I'm taking what I want. That could be one way. That's probably like kind of chaotic evil. Like that could be like one way of looking at your relationship to Mahu. Or it can be like, I am the healing rains that come after a drought, right? You know, I am the fiery passion necessary to create good art, right? Like these are also different ways you could worship Mahu and like curate your own relationship to divinity here, right? So I hope that answers some questions and some of that illuminates my process a little bit more. Fire, waves, volcanoes, tides. Yes, that's correct. So moving on to the next question. Let's see. Question from NV. How did you decide that dragons and giants would be the first inhabitants? That is a great question. I knew that I wanted there to be an aspect of Andake's mythic past that I wanted it to be like really different from the present. So I was like, okay, no humanoids. Right? Like, let's start there. No humanoids. And I seriously, like, played with the idea of, like, dinosaurs. Like, straight up just, like, dinosaurs. Right? And, you know, but I was like, what if there was, like, a people? Like, several peoples of Andake's, like, mythic, like, prehistoric past, really. That has, like, you know, there are ruins, you know, of these civilizations, like, scattered across Andake. That's cool to me. And there is already something in, I think, Forgotten Realms canon in D&D 5th edition known as the Thousand Year War in, like, one of D&D's, like, canon settings, which is a war between dragons and giants. But in the D&D version of it, it ends with a truce between the two, they call it, like, the two races, right? And I was like, what if the war just straight up wiped them out, right? I was like, that's the extinction event, right? They fought against each other, and they basically wiped each other out. And this is, I think, you know, the war between giants and dragons is probably the only instance of a race-based distinction, between people in Andake's canon setting. And I actually want to take that back. I wouldn't call it a race-based distinction. They're like different species, I would say. They're both people, right? They're both still considered people. Like, dragons are people, giants are people, but they're like two totally different species, right? And that's important to me. And it's not like, you know, all red dragons lived in one place and all storm giants lived in like one place, but like, you know, like the creation myth behind this is like the different kinds of giants and dragons were made by like the different gods within the eight. But there, you know, there was no like conflict between storm giants and like stone giants, right? Like I also wanted to kind of stay away from that, but I felt a little bit more comfortable playing with a species-based distinction because giants and dragons don't have an easy real world analogy, if that makes sense. It's not like the concept of a giant is racist, right? Like in and of itself, as opposed to like you could kind of argue that for like an orc or a goblin, right? So like that was also another reason why I felt a little bit more comfortable playing with like a species-based distinction there. I also wanted dragons and giants to just be fucking huge, because like both of these species are like just gigantic, right? Like they're called giants, right? And when you think dragon, you think, oh, big lizard, right? So like that was also important to me. I wanted there to be evidence of like big, like a mighty, like ancient, huge in every sense of the word, like civilizations, like before the modern 8 nations that we have now. That was also important to me. Also, dragons and giants are just fucking cool. That's another reason. They're just cool. I was like, this was like back when, over a year ago at this point, like year and a half, year and 9 months, when I was like first doing world building for Andake, and I was like flipping through like various D&D books, and I was like, ooh, like giants and dragons, like those are cool, you know, like I want to put those in somehow. So like that's also another reason. Moving on, Samantha Tazia says, I'm so far behind in this pod. Just listened to Arc 1, Episode 10. Was so excited to be hearing all of this. Yay! I hope I didn't spoil you too hard. Damn. Because I feel like I've said some spoilery things during this Q&A. But yay, thank you so much for joining us. I'm so glad you are here. So happy that you're here and listening to this. I'm glad you're getting something out of this. Moving on. Yes, it is an Appa without a face and with wings. It's so cute. TT. Let's move on to a question from NV. Is there a fleshed out lore / myth of creation? And how is it connected to divinity? Yes, there is. Yes, there is. Let me see if I can just pull up my notes here and maybe even read it out to you. Ooh, special little treat. Special treat for my patrons, for our patrons rather, that my PCs, my players don't even know. So y'all are really getting spoiled here. Just off the top of my dome. Okay. I'm going to talk a lot about my process of world building, and I don't necessarily would do the same process now, if that makes sense, because I feel like I've grown so much as a GM and as a world builder that a lot of the things I did like a year and 9 months ago, I don't think is how I would approach building campaign 2, for instance, because I feel like I've learned a lot from my process in the past. So let's take a look here. Under my world document, lore and history. Let's see. I actually like have a legit doc where I like organize everything. I'm just scared to screen share because I feel like I'll accidentally put like a major spoiler up here and then I won't be able to take that back. So basically, for Andake, creation myth. There's this idea that, like, first of all, similar to like the Greek creation myth, because I'm also a classics nerd, so I'm drawing a lot of my influences upon Greek and Roman mythology as well. Basically, in the beginning or before the beginning, there was nothing, right? There was just emptiness, nothing, right? And then life just sort of sprang out of nothingness. Disorderly, chaotic, beautiful, riotous life just sort of sprang out of nothingness. And this life took the form of the gods, the 8 gods that we know now, right? Mengshen, Zhidi, the Raven Queen, Yudabathi, Nitbuza, Mahu, Sen, Galtanger, and who am I missing? Scott and Ectus, of course. Right, the 8 gods, they sprang out of this nothingness. And this new life was known as the Beyond. You know, the realm of the gods. They were just sort of chilling. They were chilling out in the realm of the gods. They were like, hell yeah, we're alive. Let's be, yeah. The concept of divinity didn't even exist at that point because they were the only entities alive. So there's nothing for them to be gods against, if that makes sense. And after like the 8, sort of like grew out of this riotous life and like formed distinct personalities, they became the 8. That probably took like several thousand years, if not like several tens of thousands of years. And then like once they like sort of like gained their own identities, they were like, you know what, let's make stuff, right? Because it's important to me. And like I don't think this has really come up in the main campaign, but this is definitely in my notes and in my dramaturgy for myself. It's important to me that this desire to create is like an innate part of the human experience. Excuse me, that was disgusting. If you saw, I'm just not even gonna comment on that. Anyway, this desire to create is just like an innate part of human existence, right? For me, it's just such a core part of the human experience. Where like, by create, I mean like art, right? This desire also to like, for some people to have kids, right? Or like to like make stuff, right? To make something, to have a life, to like build a home and build a community and hold each other and sing and dance and laugh and paint and write and tell stories. Like that just feels so like critically human to me. And like, because of that's also reflected in the gods I've made. Right, so the gods, after just sort of dicking around for however many millions of years, they were like, let's make stuff because this is like a burning desire within ourselves. We have to make, because to us it's like breathing. For a fish it's like swimming. For a bird it's like flying. It's just what we do. We make, we create. So the gods made life. The gods made the after and the now. the now is the equivalent of the material plane. The after is sort of like where souls go after you die, right? And the beyond sort of surrounds all of this, right? Like a beautiful Russian nesting doll, right? And like out of that desire, that impulse came like land and sea, right? And wave and air and cloud and tree and dirt and stone, you know, and flesh and blood, you know, and the first peoples, dragons and giants, the first peoples of Andake, they were created out of the natural world, out of, you know, the weave. You know, this magic system was also born from this like creation. And there was this period of time in like Andake's mythic, like super creation myth past, right? This is all mythology. And like a lot of this is like, you know, like Dr. Lusso would be like, well, actually, technically, you know, like, etc. Like this is the creation myth, right? Because this is a fantasy world, it's probably also literal in some way, right? The first peoples were made, and from life sprang death. So the Raven Queen also learned of what death was, right? All of these things, and that's sort of like the creation myth of the gods and also of like the world of Andake, right? And after the giants and dragons were made, the rest is history, as they say. So moving on. Question for Mitzi. How did the cast also influence the lore of Andake? Pretty majorly, I would say. So I've mentioned this a few times across like various channels, but I'll say it again because it bears repeating. That before we started Transplanar RPG, I held a session -1, which is a session before a session 0, where basically I sat my cast down and I said, listen, what do you want there to exist in this world? Give me a wish list. Right? And like Lyra and Max and C and Erica just threw a bunch of shit at me and I wrote it down. And the stuff they threw at me that was the most important that I remember to this day include, I want to play in a world that is super diverse and isn't just like Western European, right? And I was like, bet. And they're like, I want it to be like a mix of other cultures, so it's not just like fantasy China either. I want it to be like more diverse than that too. So I was like, bet, I'll do that, right? So like that was important for like a lot of this world building and the research I wanted to do. Erica specifically, I remember this, said that she was interested in playing with the ideas of like destiny and choice, right? And the differences, like what does it mean to like have a destiny or like for your path to be preordained, which is like so typical in a lot of fantasy stories, like, and like versus like what does it mean to like have choice, like as a character and as a player, right? Like player agency as well as like, oh, like she was interested in this idea of like playing a character, which we're now seeing in V, who like ever since she was little, like in V's backstory. So if this is like spoilers, so you plug your ears, blah, 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 blah. V's mom basically told her like, you're special, you're destined for something greater, you're destined, I just know it. And V was like, sure thing, mom, what a load of shit. And like is now being like, because of all of the things that have happened in our campaign so far, it's like, oh shit, was my mom right? Am I destined for things that are greater? What does it mean to be destined for something? What does it mean to be chosen? Why am I chosen? And is there no answer to that question, right? Like stuff like that. So like I made sure to build this idea of destiny into the fabric of the campaign's plot. So like that is woven in from like Arc 1, Episode 1, right? And it's like a major theme I'm playing with, this idea of things that may or may not be inevitable. So we'll see how that plays out as we embark on Arc 4. So the cast also continues to influence the lore of Andake with just like how they play. C is Transplanar RPGs has grown into the role of like our dramaturg and my like co-creative director. So I am always brainstorming with C specifically about ways to like deepen and strengthen the pre-existing lore of Andake and also build upon what we've already established. You'll still be like, oh, what if this happened in this arc? Or like, oh, what if we went here? Or like, oh, what if we met this kind of person who like gave us this kind of information, et cetera, et cetera. So there's that aspect as well. And also like the classic DM struggle of like, oh, players like never doing what you want them to do, so like you have to improvise. But I like improvising, so I've improvised like some various aspects of the lore in Transplanar RPG as well. So question from NV: do souls more move from the after to the beyond? Is the beyond limited to the 8? I guess we'll have to die to find out. But just no. I'm not going to cop out. I'm going to actually answer that question. It's generally accepted by Andake's death scholars that after you die, your soul moves on to the after, which is a different place from the beyond. And only if you've like become an emissary or like form a pact with an emissary or like do things in the after to draw the attention of the eight? Do you sort of get the latitude to like move beyond the veil, separating the after and the beyond, right? But that's a process that takes a long time and is very rare and doesn't happen to every person who used to be mortal, if that makes sense. And emissaries are from the beyond, and they move freely between the beyond and the after, with some more difficulty into the now, and now with like extreme difficulty because the now is cut off from the after and beyond after the cataclysm. Hope that makes sense. So I think that's all in terms of questions that there are. I'm gonna just sort of like wait a little bit to see if like folks have any other questions or if anyone else like thinks of anything. I'm just gonna sort of like pause here and drink some water to let y'all think and type stuff out. Excuse me, and don't forget to drop a like for this video if you're sitting there on your YouTube app. NV says, in one of Professor Chang's workshops, you mentioned that you always start writing a story at the end. Have your players' actions or backstories caused you to change anything about the trajectory? No. No, they have not. No, they have not, my friend. And some might call that railroady, but I would call that by design, because I don't think there's anything they could do that would change the trajectory of the end of this campaign. Not gonna lie, because how I've written or planned the final confrontation or like the end of campaign 1 is very flexible. And it's sort of already, it's a lot of it is also not really a spoiler because our players know from like episode 4, I think, of like arc 1 that another cataclysm is due in like 3.5 years, right? So like that won't come out of the left field. You know what I mean? Like I wouldn't just sort of like blindside my players with like a big thing at the end. I always like try to build up to it. And I sort of like planted that seed in like episode 4 or 5 or like whenever they met Dr. Aluso, right? And that was, yeah. So like I think it's pretty obvious to like not just my players but the PCs and also the audience that like the final confrontation, the big culmination of main campaign 1 is like stopping the second cataclysm from coming and also like trying to reverse the effects of the current cataclysm. So like the finale will address, the end of the campaign will address both of those things, right? And like that hasn't changed and probably won't change. The details will change, and I wish I could tell y'all, but it's a huge spoiler, so I really can't. I'm really on the fence right now. I'm like deciding hardcore right now between two things that will heavily influence like an important detail of the finale. Because like fans have theorized about this. I'm not going to say what it is. I'm going to be as vague as possible. Fans have theorized about this and have said like, I'll feel so X if Y turns out to be Z, you know, or like, so I'm sitting here and I'm like, I'm like on the fence right now. And I think I'm going to decide after arc 4. I'm going to wait and see what my PCs do during arc 4 and like make that decision and like foreshadow it through like arcs 5 through 8, I think. But like, yeah, like that's the extent of like how much my PC's choices have like changed the overall shape of the finale. But I also, again, I don't think it's railroady because I feel like it's been telegraphed since arc 1 and like my players like sign up for it and they know that's coming. But the way to get there and like the minor detail, like, and like not minor, but like the major details of how to get there and like what that finale will look like are still up in the air, right? I have like 2 sentences written for like what the end of the campaign will entail to sort of give you an idea of like how flexible it is. So moving on, is there a second, also from NV, you're just a star asker of this Q&A. Is there a second campaign in the works? You've been saying campaign 1. Yes, there is. Yes, there is. And particularly eagle-eyed subscribers to our YouTube channel will notice that today I went through all of our past VODs and I changed the names of every single past VOD and also the title of each playlist to say campaign 1 at the end. because I am thinking already about campaign 2. And it's not going to be, it's not going to be relevant probably until like the end of arc 8, which is going to be the last arc of campaign 1. But I am thinking about like the future of Transplanar RPG as a stream channel and as an actual play production organization, right? Beyond the story of the 8. Right? Beyond the story of the PCs coming together to fix the cataclysm. By the way, we have to come up with a name for this campaign. We're like almost halfway through. We still haven't come up with a name for this campaign. It's just Transplanar RPG's main campaign. So if folks have ideas, drop in the chat, right? It might just be called Campaign 1, right? We might just end up just calling it Campaign 1, but it would be nice to name the campaign. Yeah. I hope that answered the question. Yes, there is a campaign 2 in the works. It's super vague right now. I haven't even decided like anything super detailed about it, but I think I know what the overall premise of campaign 2 is going to be, but I don't know anything about the cast. I don't know anything about the like the specifics of the lore or the specifics, right? But I think I have an overall idea of the hook. But that's not going to be relevant for like another year and a half, given like the rate at which we've been playing this campaign. So you don't have to worry about that too much. Another question from Envy. Are there any tensions between the gods? Yes. What is their relation to each other in the Pantheon? Complicated. It doesn't seem like they have been portrayed as those gods always seeking more worshippers. No. And in the setting document that my players and guest players have access to, I describe the gods of Andake as remote and unaligned. And that is intentional. They're supposed to be like really unreachable. Like not even the most devout cleric of the Raven Queen has probably communed with the Raven Queen directly. Which is why the fact that Oka's a god taxi and Scott and Nectus are inside V and like the Raven Queen's inside Reb is a big fucking deal. It's like another reason why it's such a huge deal. Even though you could argue that these gods inside our PCs and NPCs right now are just shards of their real actual selves, which are still out in the beyond, like an echo of themselves, like the LaCroix version of like the fruit blast of like the actual god, right? To speak a little bit more about the tensions. The most obvious relationship between two gods are Scott and Nectus, the lovers. They're in love. They love each other. They're in a relationship. They've had their rocky patches in the past. I'm looking directly at the Copper Stewards and at the Chromium Order. Yes, I am. But they had like a big breakup and they've gotten back together. I would say Nitbuza and Mahu are sisters. So Nitbuza is Mahu's older sister. So there's, they love each other very much, but there's also that younger sibling, older sibling, like, sometimes like that tension and that like disagreement there. I will say that Mengshen, Zhidi, Sen, Yudabathi, and Galtanger, these 4 gods have shifting power dynamics between them. And I would say the main word I would use to characterize their relationship with each other, all 8, would be like shifting. Because like, it's not like one guy's in charge, right? It's not like, Galtanger is the head bitch in charge, right? It's always like, it's more or less the power is equally dispersed between the gods, and there's always like shifting power dynamics. But overall, I would say the gods have a amicable-ish relationship with each other. And if they did not, then I think that would be reflected in the now. And as of, this the start of this campaign, I think I started at 405 AT, which is like the year marker for Andake, and AT stands for After Treaty, which is like the Great Peace Treaty between the 8 nations, right? That basically means that we're not going to wage war on each other, and so there hasn't been like a huge war in Andake for over 405 years as of the beginning of this campaign. Now 406, but now there's the Cataclysm, which is like its own thing. Right. So if the gods were fighting each other in the beyond, it'd probably trickle down economics to the now, right? And like reflect in like warring tensions between the 8 nations and whatnot. So moving on to a question from Samantha. What world is campaign 2 set in? Fantastic question, Samantha. And C is right. C has pitched several ideas about campaign 2. I will say, without giving too many things away, it will deliver on the name of our stream channel, Transplanar. That's all I'm gonna say. It's gonna be a Transplanar campaign for sure, and I'm really excited about that. Goodbye, Mitzi. Thank you so much for hanging out. Catch the rest of the VOD later if you have the time. Thank you so much for hanging out. It's been just about over an hour since I started streaming, so I'm going to take another sip of water and give folks time to type other questions if you have any more. Any final questions, I'd love to field them. Wait, I look so funny when drinking water. Look, I look like a Cyclops. A Cyclops with a big beak. C said, they meant what we should call campaign 1. Yes. C has pitched several ideas. Yes. I feel like you've pitched ideas for both the name of campaign 1 and also like what campaign 2 should be about. So yeah. I also have ideas for what we should call campaign 1. They like range from like Paragon related stuff to like stuff about, something about the Cataclysm to like something about the Empty. Yeah, I've got ideas. They're percolating. I've got ideas. That's nothing. That was off. Hold on. I've got chills. I've got ideas. They're percolating. Right? There we go. That's more on pitch. I don't see any other questions, so I'm just gonna launch into a wrap-up of this Q&A session. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in, for watching. Really, really, really appreciate all of your questions, your attentiveness, and thank you for being such incredible patrons of Transplanar RPG. Your support means so much to us, and it enables us to keep doing this thing. It enables us to keep making Andake, and like playing Transplanar RPG and streaming on a weekly basis and like doing podcasts on a weekly basis and like doing all these cool mini series and various other things and yada yada yada. It's all because of you. So thank you. And because I love you all, I'm going to answer this final question from NV, which is, what is a piece of lore that you planned out that you scrapped? And let's end the Q&A on that question, which is such a good question. What is a piece of lore I planned out that I scrapped? That I've since scrapped? Okay, so I have a very utilitarian approach to world building, which is even if I scrap something, I put it in broth for like another project or for like later down the line, or I'll like change it. I won't like scrap it completely. I'll like change it to be something else. Okay, you know what? Okay. How about this? Really minor to actually answer your question, so you don't walk away empty-handed. Costas. I had ideas for Costas that I have since scrapped, or rather that I've since changed. How about that? Costas is an NPC that we met Arc 1 and that we haven't seen since. So whether or not they come back is, who knows? Maybe Costas will come back. But my original intention for Costas may or may not still be there, but the importance they have to the party, I think, and the importance they have to the campaign has definitely changed since I introduced them, mostly because my party was not necessarily very interested in them. So I was like, okay, I'm not gonna force this, right? Even though I feel like the fans, the audience were like, who is Costas? What's up with Costas? But like, I feel like my players were like, fuck Costas. I don't give a shit about this character, actually, Connie, so there's that. So yeah, I hope that was useful. I hope that answered your question. Now I'm going to do a sign off of this Q&A. Our first ever cast Q&A. Maybe Costas will show up randomly at Dr. Lisa's address, but they are pretty obsessed with the Chrysalis right now, so we'll see. Maybe they'll come up with like Chrysalis stuff. Who knows? Thank you all so much for tuning in. I've been Connie, pronouns they, he, and she. I've been so honored to be the first member of the Cast Q&A, our monthly Cast Q&A, with the topic, the lore of Andake. I hope you all have had fun and have learned something through this Q&A, and make sure to stay tuned to our Discord, to our Patreon, to our Twitter for the topic and for the special cast member for our next Q&A session, which will take place in September. So, thank you all so much. Please tune in this Saturday, September 4th for Arc 4, Episode 1. We're starting a brand new freaking arc, hell yeah, of Transplanar RPG. We're going to be in too long. It's going to be awesome. Without giving too much away, there's going to be court politics. There's going to be weird, things from the past coming up again. There's going to be Oka. There's going to be a lot of Oka angst. So please tag along for the ride. We'd love to have you there. Use 3K giveaway in chat to be entered in a cool Roll20 digital giveaway for that. And tell your friends about us, because word of mouth helps so much. And thank you so much for being a patron. We love you all so much, and I will see you this Saturday at 3 p.m. US Central Time on twitch.tv/TransplanerRPG, September 4th. Peace.